Okay, so lesson number 3. We are all about the Bible. We are all about God. So if someone says, what are RP about? There's 2 answers. And now, question number 3, you have it there on your handout, of course, but it's understanding ourselves. This is a weird one, maybe. Understanding ourselves. We're all about understanding ourselves. Why is this important? Well, here's a quote from John Calvin. Nearly all wisdom we possess, that is to say, true and sound wisdom, consists of 2 parts, the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. That's sort of some of his introductory comments to his biggest work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, when he's trying to explain what Christianity is all about. And he starts off this way. He says, if you don't know God, or if you don't know yourself, then you can't really know God. And if you don't know God, you can't really know yourself. This can be misunderstood to mean that you need to be like in touch with yourself and understand all the different aspects of yourself. He's not talking about that. He's talking about the comparison between God and man. In order for you to understand how great and good God is, you need to understand how small and insignificant we are. And if we are to really understand who we are, we need to understand how great God is. When you have a picture that doesn't have any perspective, like you take a picture of a fish, you just take a big picture of a fish. It could be 6 feet long. It could be 6 inches long. But once you have perspective, you put a ruler in there, then you can take a picture and, oh, wow, that's a big fish. Okay, now that makes some sense. That's what this is talking about. We need to have perspective when we're thinking about God and when we're thinking about ourselves. So you could say the same thing we said about God. What you believe about yourself ultimately determines everything you do. Because we've declared God to be dead or really unimportant, he doesn't actually have any significance in life, then we become gods and we determine what's right and wrong. So that determines what we do and the position that we take in life. So what you believe about yourself ultimately determines everything you do. If you believe that you're just an animal that grows out of, billions of years of evolution, then that's going to dictate how you behave. If you believe that you are what you do and you recognize all your failures, you're going to see that you're nothing and you're not significant to anyone. And who cares whether you live or die? It doesn't matter because life is insignificant. We are, as the concept of God is lost in our culture, it's no wonder that we're ramping up how much people need counseling, how much people need the suicide rates go up. Everything goes up because we have no real sense of who we are. And so if we really want to know who we are, we have to understand God. If we want to understand God, we have to understand ourselves. So I'm not going to go into this question since we're running out of time, but common misconceptions about who we are. I mentioned a few of them and how it's revealed in the way that we live. So question number 2, who are we? Man is made in the image of God. Genesis 1 says that God says, let us make man in our image. And so our purpose, what that says is that our purpose is to reflect God into this world. I talked about our ultimate purpose, glorify God and enjoy Him. Here's a secondary purpose. The way that we glorify God and enjoy Him is by reflecting God into this world. I want you to imagine yourself as being like a mirror. It's interesting that God commanded the people of Israel to not make any images of Himself. Don't make any images and bow down to them. But He filled the world with little images of Himself, mankind. And so we are to, in a sense, reflect who God is into this world. We are the clearest on this earth. We're the clearest argument for God. You can look around the whole world and see the power of God, but humanity actually gives the clearest argument for God, that God exists. So in what ways do we reflect the image of God? Let's brainstorm a few of those. In what ways do we reflect the image of God? We can create. God created, and now we take the things He made, and we can create out of it. And we've created some incredible things. Incredible. Dominion. We have authority over on earth. So everything is placed under us, and we're to take care of it and cultivate it. Just like God rules over all things. We rule over the earth. We know the difference between right and wrong. Yeah, we have a sense of right and wrong. There's a sense of morality, which animals don't have, but humanity has because we're made in the image of God. We can love, and God is love. So we are made in the image of God that way. Good. You could go on and on about how we reflect the image of God. I'm going to give you 4 here. God created humans with a spirit. So we just read earlier that God is spirit, and he gave us a spirit. Animals don't have souls, everlasting souls. Once they die, they cease to exist. God may recreate them. You know, people are concerned about whether they're going to see their animals in the new heavens and the new earth. And I say, well, God could do that. He could recreate, but when our animals die, they don't go. Their souls don't go into heaven because they're not made in the image of God. We are made in the image of God. We have eternal souls. God will recreate animals for us in the new heavens and new earth, I anticipate, but they aren't eternal like we are, everlasting like we are. So God created humans with a spirit. God created humans with perfect knowledge. Perfect knowledge, that's what Colossians 3:10 says. So we had the right perspective on this whole world. Adam and Eve, for a time, they had this perfect perspective on the world. They saw it rightly. They knew what they knew was true. Number 3, God created humans with perfect righteousness. They didn't have to really work at obeying God. There was an obedience built into obeying God until the serpent came in. They had perfect righteousness. They lived perfectly before God. And then God created humans to live in relationship. I mentioned this earlier because God is triune, man, 3 in 1, and so he lived eternally in relationship. In order for us to reflect the Trinity, he created us to live in relationship. So Genesis 2 talks about man, God making man and women. And I used to think that God made the woman just because the guy was like lonely and he needed a friend. And, you know, there's a little bit of part of that there. But I believe the real reason why God created the woman is because Adam by himself couldn't reflect the nature of God the way he should, because he couldn't live in relationship with an equal. God lives eternally within the 3 persons, but one person can't reflect the image of God because God is relational. So he created the woman. It wasn't just to like satisfy him or make him happy. It was because he needed to reflect God in that relationship. And so as you think about your relationships, don't think of them as just sort of like selfishly, I want these people around in my life. No, this is your opportunity to reflect the nature of the relationship that God has within himself, the relationship of the Trinity. So those are 4. We brainstormed. There are lots of other things that we could talk about. But what happened? Question number 4. What happened? Sin ruined everything. Genesis 3, the serpent comes into the garden. Eve eats the forbidden fruit, gives some to Adam, who's there with her, saw this whole thing going on, didn't step in at all. He ate the fruit as well. And when you read that story in the Bible, you should have in your mind sort of like a big mushroom cloud. You can see those mushroom clouds after an atomic bomb is set off. Think of that as the big mushroom cloud, because it might sound insignificant. It took a bite of an apple, but that's when the whole world was destroyed. Humanity was destroyed. So let's think about the effects of this sin. Let's talk about sin first. What is sin? There's 2 parts of sin. Sin is, there's a sin of commission, doing what God forbids, like murder. If you murder someone, you are breaking a command because you didn't do you did what he forbids. And then there's sins of omission. That's not doing what God commands. So when God commands you to love your neighbor and you don't love your neighbor, it's not like you necessarily did anything wrong. It's just you didn't act on what God called you to act on. So there are 2 kinds of sins, and I think most often as Christians we can tend to break the second one, have sins of omission, not doing what we're called to do, rather than necessarily sins of commission. You need to not just think about your life and think about not having done bad things, but think, have you done the things that God called you to do? So what is sin? In what ways do we sin? We sin through our actions, our words, our thoughts, our motives. Actions, words, thoughts, and motives. Particularly as Christians, we can fall into this pattern of doing the right thing, but with the wrong motivations, for the wrong reasons. And that's just as bad. Eiley, I like your hand. I'm going to keep speeding through this because we're almost out of time. So I'll get your hand in a bit, and maybe after class. So we need to be aware of sins on its various levels, not just the actions that we do. Question number 5, who are we now? Because of sin now, who are we? Think of that mirror illustration. This mirror now has been smashed on the ground into a million pieces. And have you ever looked in a broken mirror? It's a little weird because you can look into it and you can see an eye over here and your mouth up there and your nose down here. You could see a reflection. You know that there's a human looking into this mirror, but it's all distorted and twisted. So that's what happened to humanity. Humanity shattered into a million pieces, and we still reflect the image of God, but it's so marred that it's hard to recognize even sometimes. We know it's there, but it's hard to recognize sometimes. So we still have a spirit, that nothing changed there. Instead of perfect knowledge, now we have flawed logic. Now we come up with these wild theories that, since God doesn't exist, the world must have come about because of millions and billions of years of random chance that created life and this complex universe that we live in. That is, it's just staggering to me that, how many times would you set off an atomic bomb and something actually better comes out of the world instead of it blowing it to all smithereens. So we have this flawed logic, and there's plenty more examples of that. C, instead of perfect righteousness, now we have a vague sense of right and wrong. We are told that the law is written on everyone's heart, so there's a sense of right and wrong, but now it's all mixed up and twisted, and we declare evil to be good and good to be evil. And so we have this a flawed sense of righteousness. Continuing on, D, instead of peace in relationships, we now have conflict. That describes life. Life is a series of conflicts because of the fall into sin. We don't as easily reflect the image of God because we're always in conflict. Letter E, instead of pleasing God, we're now unable to please God. That's what Romans 8 says. Those controlled by the sinful nature cannot please God. And Hebrews says, apart from faith, you cannot please God. That's because that's getting to the motivations of things. You might do some outwardly good things, but what's the motivation? If you don't have God as your motivation, then it's not ultimately pleasing to God, and therefore we're unable to please God. F, instead of being born innocent and good, we're now born guilty and corrupt, and this is what we refer to as original sin. There is this great misunderstanding that children are born innocent and good, and that humanity is generally basically good, and that as long as we educate people, then we'll prosper. Well, the Bible tells us very clearly that because of the sin of Adam, we've all died spiritually, and we are corrupt, and that's why we need the righteousness of the other man, Jesus Christ, to redeem us. There's more, and we're going to finish with this. So it's not just this, our destruction, but here, separation from God. We were separated from God. Isaiah 59:2 says that your sins have separated you from your God, and because of your sins, he's hidden his face from you. We're under the wrath of God. That's spoken of in Colossians 3 as well as Romans 1, where we're under the wrath of God, and we're storing up the wrath of God. Death, Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death. We will die. Hell, Revelation 20 talks about this lake of burning fire, and the smoke goes on forever and ever. Purposelessness, Ecclesiastes 12, apart from God, life is meaningless. And then we live in a cursed world. Romans 8, the creation itself is groaning and yearning for its redemption. So that was very quick. I realize that we're going to get to the person and work of Jesus Christ. So that sets us up for this great plan of salvation to come to fruition in the person of Jesus. So we are all about the Bible, all about God, and all about understanding ourselves. We have to understand ourselves relative to who God is. So I think that's where we're going to close. You are dismissed.